Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the source material on something called the learning pyramid, mastery through active retention. Now, we are going to be looking at a topic that honestly affects almost all of us. But listen, we need to start right off the bat with a tough realization from our sources. If you are studying the way most people do, your current methods are likely failing you. Seriously. You might actually be pouring your precious time and energy right down the drain. Okay, let's dive into this. The text gives us this hard truth. You're probably wasting 80% of your time. And you know what the wildest part is? You probably don't even realize it's happening. I want you to imagine you're trying to fill up a bucket with water, okay? But this bucket has holes poked all over the bottom and the sides. No matter how frantically you pour that water in, almost all of it just immediately leaks right out. Frustrating, right? Well, that is the exact leaky bucket analogy for what most students are doing. They spend hours upon hours trying to absorb and pour information into their minds, but their brains just don't retain much of it at all. I mean, be totally honest with yourself here. Ever spent hours cramming for a test only to sit down at the exam and realize you've completely forgotten everything? It is just a terrible feeling. Our sources point out that most of us eventually learn how to study the right way, but man, it usually happens far too late. We're talking well after years of frustration and just mediocre results. But that stops today. By the time we finish walking through these concepts, you're going to have a rock-solid, science-backed framework to actually study effectively. So, to fix the problem, we first need to identify the holes in our buckets. Let's break down the 3 massive studying mistakes you are probably making right now. Mistake number 1, highlighting and rereading. This is a total classic. Most students genuinely believe that painting their textbooks in neon yellow and then rereading their notes 3 times over will somehow magically help them remember the material. The problem is, it gives you this incredibly false sense of security. It just makes you feel like you're being highly productive when you're really not. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive difference between familiarity and true understanding. You see, when you reread, your brain simply recognizes the words on the page. Think about it kind of like this. If you keep watching your favorite movie over and over again, does that make you a master filmmaker? Well, of course not. You're just getting highly familiar with the story. And that is exactly what happens with passive rereading. Recognition is just simply not the same thing as memorization. To put that into perspective, our sources highlight a truly jarring statistic. Studies show that rereading has a retention rate of only 10%. Literally just 10. That means if you spend your entire afternoon rereading a complex chapter today, by this time next week, your brain will have casually thrown away 90% of it. Which brings us right to mistake number 2. Let's be real, we've all been there. Pulling an all-nighter, fueled by way too much coffee, trying to stuff information into our brains like it's an overflowing suitcase we're desperately sitting on to zip shut. But here's the thing, cramming doesn't work long-term. Your brain is highly efficient, and it actually treats this forced, last-minute crammed information exactly like junk mail. It just throws it away. It intuitively knows you don't really need it because you're not giving your brain a real, repeated reason to hold on to it. Sure, you might remember it for the test tomorrow, but poof, a few days later, the whole shebang is totally gone. Now for mistake number 3, passive studying. I have a question for you. Would you read a book to learn how to swim? Seriously, would you read a textbook about the butterfly stroke and then just jump straight into the deep end of a pool, expecting to be an Olympic swimmer? No way, you'd drown. Yet when it comes to studying, we do exactly that. We passively read the textbook, we passively watch a lecture, and we just assume, yep, I've learned the material. But unless you actively engage with it, you are absolutely going to drown when that exam hits. So the crucial point is that we need to understand a major paradigm shift. Effective studying is entirely about retention over consumption. It's not about the hours spent. You know, some people study for 3 hours and forget everything, while others study for just 1 hour and remember it for life. The big difference is that real learning only happens when your brain is actively challenged, when it struggles, when it makes connections, and when it retrieves data on its own. And that brings us to the core concept of our explainer today, the learning pyramid. Look at the bottom here. Passive consumption yields terrible results. Reading gives you that 10% retention rate we talked about. Sitting in a lecture, just 20%. Watching a demonstration bumps you up a little bit to 30%. But consider what happens when you cross the threshold into active engagement. Practicing a concept skyrockets your attention to 75%. And actually teaching that concept to someone else, a massive 90% retention rate. The data is super clear on this. To study smarter, you absolutely must climb to the top of this pyramid. So how do we actually do that? Here is step 1 from the sources. Active recalling and testing. If you want to remember more in literally half the time, you have to use active recall. Instead of passively letting information just wash over you, you need to force your brain to lift the heavy weight. You got to actively pull the information out of your memory. It's that pulling out, that mental struggle to remember, that actually cements the knowledge into your brain. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is it gives us a specific, science-backed method to put this into practice, the Feynman technique. The premise is beautifully simple. If you cannot explain something in simple terms, well, you simply don't understand it yet. So pick a concept from your notes and try to teach it as if you were talking to a 5-year-old. When you inevitably stumble or struggle, and you will, you've just successfully identified a gap in your knowledge. So you go back, relearn that specific part, and refine your explanation until it's crystal clear. Teaching literally forces your brain to organize the information perfectly. Another really great way to lift the weight is through past papers and self-quizzing. The sources point out that top students don't actually study more than you do. They just test themselves way more. A real-world case study showed that students who utilize active self-quizzing and flashcards before studying scored 50% higher on exams than those who just passively read their notes. 50%! That is a real game changer. Once you've mastered active recall, you have to tackle step 2, spaced repetition and the forgetting curve. We mentioned earlier that the brain deletes what it thinks is junk mail, right? Well, that's because your brain is naturally biologically wired to forget things it doesn't regularly use. And the speed at which it forgets is honestly terrifying. Did you know that without any intervention, you lose 50% of what you learn within a single hour? 1 hour. This is known as the forgetting curve, and it perfectly explains why that last-minute cramming fails you in the long run. But hey, don't worry, because you can completely hack your memory to beat this curve with even less effort. You do it by spreading your studying out over time using spaced repetition. Our source material gives us the exact 3-step timeline to make this happen. On day 1, you learn the material. Then you actually let your brain start to forget it, but right before it's gone, on day 3, you do a quick 10-minute active review. Finally, on day 7, you force your brain to do a self-test without any notes. By repeatedly recalling the information just as you're about to forget it, you signal to your brain that this data is absolutely crucial and it moves it right into long-term storage. Which brings us to our final hurdle, step 3, making studying a daily habit. Because let's be totally honest with each other, none of these amazing techniques matter at all if you procrastinate, get overwhelmed, and burn out before you even open a book. The real challenge is sticking to the routine, so we're going to fix that right now with 3 simple habit hacks. Hack number 1 is the 2-minute rule. This is a brilliant psychological trick to just obliterate procrastination. When you think, I have to study for 3 hours, your brain panics and you end up, scrolling on your phone. Instead, tell yourself you'll only study for 2 minutes, just 1 page, just 1 single flashcard. The magic here is that once you start, all that friction disappears, and your brain shifts right into might as well keep going mode. You trick yourself into starting, which is almost always the hardest part. Hack number 2 is habit stacking. This means you attach a small study habit to a routine you already do every single day without fail. So, for example, right after you brush your teeth, you review 1 flashcard. Or, right after breakfast, you do a quick 5-minute self-quiz. By linking the new habit to an existing, deeply ingrained routine, studying stops being this big chore you have to schedule and just becomes an automatic reflex. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final hack, the Pomodoro technique. If studying feels like an endless, grueling marathon, your brain will violently resist it. You have to prevent burnout. So you break it down. 25 minutes of highly active, deep focus, followed by a strict 5-minute break to rest your mind. You repeat this cycle 4 times, and then you reward yourself with a much longer break. It keeps your brain fresh, focused, and completely engaged the whole time. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this absolute hard truth from our sources today. Small, daily effort beats last-minute panic every single time. Even the absolute best study techniques in the world won't help you if you only pull them out the night before the exam. Consistency is the ultimate secret weapon. Master active recall, space out your repetitions, and use those habit hacks to put your daily effort on autopilot. So, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on as you close out this explainer. What is one passive study habit you are going to drop today? Are you going to throw away the highlighter? Are you going to stop the mindless rereading? Choose one thing right now to eliminate. Replace it with an active retention strategy from the Learning Pyramid and go absolutely crush your studies. Thanks so much for learning with me today.